What if I told you the most terrifying thing in all of Tolkien's legendarium never lifted a weapon, never wore a ring of power, and never once raised his voice above a song? There is a figure at the center of The Lord of the Rings who breaks every rule Tolkien spent 40 years establishing about evil and power and dominion. Not because he is mightier than Sauron, not because he is secretly a Vala in disguise or a servant of Ilúvatar operating under hidden instructions, but because the fundamental engine of Sauron's will, the one ring forged in the fires of Orodruin to dominate every living mind in Middle-earth, looks at Tom Bombadil and finds nothing to grip. This isn't speculation pulled from a forum. This isn't a fan theory dressed in legitimate language. This is what Tolkien actually wrote, confirmed in the text, expanded in his letters, encoded in the names and the silences of a legendarium, built with more precision than most readers ever reach. And when you follow it all the way down, through the Council of Elrond, and the house on the Withywindle, and the private correspondence of a man who knew exactly what he was putting in his world and why, what you find is something that should quietly and permanently change how you read this entire story. The ring does not work on Tom Bombadil, and the reason is not reassuring. Did Tolkien place Tom Bombadil in the story as a mystery to be solved, or as a warning about a kind of power so foundational and so strange that the darkness which wants everything will never, in any age of the world, be able to comprehend it? Let's begin at the place the movies decided was skippable, the Fellowship of the Ring. Chapter 7. In the house of Tom Bombadil. The hobbits have been rescued from the old forest. They are sitting in a small, warm house by the banks of the river Withywindle, eating and drinking and being gradually restored by something they can barely name. Frodo, perhaps wanting to understand what he is carrying, perhaps wanting to test whether it is as powerful as he fears, puts on the one ring, and Tom Bombadil looks right at him and laughs. Not a startled laugh, not the nervous laughter of someone pretending not to be afraid. Tom Bombadil laughs the way you laugh when a child tries to hide behind a curtain that doesn't reach the floor. He can see Frodo perfectly. The ring's invisibility, which works on every other set of eyes in Middle-earth, which conceals Frodo from men and elves and every creature of the natural world, does not work on Tom Bombadil. Tom takes the ring, tosses it in the air, turns it over in his fingers, and hands it back. No temptation, no moment of resistance, no visible effort of any kind. Pay attention to this next part, because this is where the first door opens. Tolkien could have made Tom immune to the ring the way Gandalf or Galadriel is immune to it. Through tremendous strength of will, through millennia of practice, through the hard-won discipline of beings who have looked at the most powerful corrupting force in the world and chosen, effortfully, to look away. Galadriel's refusal scene is one of the most charged passages in the entire book. She transforms in that scene. She grows terrible and beautiful, beyond the measure of any mortal frame, and she tells Frodo she has been tempted for a long time. Not tempted and resistant. Tempted. The ring reached into her and found something there to work with, found the desire for a kingdom of her own that she has been managing and suppressing across the full length of 3 ages. And she said no, and that no cost her something visible. Tom Bombadil doesn't say no. He doesn't have anything to say no to. The ring reaches into him and finds nothing it can use, not a void, a fullness so complete that the ring's entire mechanism of desire amplification has no gap to insert itself into. And Tom hands the ring back, with the interest you would give a nice river pebble, and goes back to his evening. Because here is what that actually means. The ring's power is the power of desire. It was forged to exploit the space between what a being is and what it wants to be. Every corruption in this story flows through that space. The ring reaches into Boromir and finds the gap between the Gondor he loves and the Gondor he is afraid is going to fall. And it fills that gap with possibility. It reaches into Gollum and finds the gap between the creature he is and the solitary precious thing he can possess. And it fills that gap with obsession. It reaches into Saruman and finds the gap between his knowledge and the power his knowledge tells him he deserves, and it fills that gap with ambition. Tom Bombadil has no gap. And this is the first piece of the dark secret, placed quietly in Chapter 7, and left there for readers willing to follow its implications. Now go forward to the Council of Elrond. The Council of Elrond is one of the most information-dense chapters Tolkien ever wrote. Representatives of every free people of Middle-earth assemble in Rivendell, and they put everything on the table. The history of the ring, the history of Sauron, the possible destinations for the ring going forward. And someone, it is Glorfindel, one of the oldest and most powerful elves still remaining in the world, someone who has seen more ages than most beings alive can conceive, asks the obvious question: why not bring the ring to Tom Bombadil? He is not being naive. He is running through genuine strategic options. If the ring cannot touch Tom Bombadil, if it cannot tempt him or bend him or corrupt him, is he not exactly the safe harbor the Fellowship needs? Is he not, in the most practical sense, the solution? Gandalf's answer takes less than a paragraph, and it contains two pieces of information, and both of them matter enormously. The first piece, within his own land, Tom Bombadil is his own master. The ring has no power over him. If the ring were brought to Tom, he could see it and hold it and not be touched by it. This is confirmed. This is not speculation. The second piece, Tom would likely lose interest in the ring and throw it away. Think about that one. Not that Tom would be unable to hold the ring. Not that the ring would find some unexpected angle of attack. That Tom would find it boring. The ring that Gollum spent 60 years pursuing across all of Middle-earth. The ring that Bilbo could not surrender, even when he genuinely wanted to. That required Gandalf's intervention to pry loose. The ring that every being who encounters it is immediately fascinated by, drawn to, cannot stop thinking about. Tom Bombadil would misplace it. Because here is where it gets strange. The ring's magnetism is not random. It reaches into what you want most and says, wordlessly, convincingly, I can give you that. That mechanism requires something to find. It requires there to be a hunger in you that the ring can identify and feed. And Tom Bombadil, as Tolkien constructs him, simply does not have one. He is not controlling a hunger. He is not suppressing a hunger. He does not have the kind of will that generates hunger, because he already has everything he needs in the form he is in. The ring looks at Tom Bombadil and sees nothing, and there is a word for a mode of existence that contains no gap between what it is and what it wants to be. In the philosophical tradition Tolkien inhabited, the tradition of medieval Catholic thought that shaped everything from his mythology's structure to its deepest emotional register, that mode of existence has a very specific name. But before we name it, we need to go somewhere older. We need to go to the elvish name no casual reader remembers. Yarwain Ben-Adar. It means oldest and fatherless. These are not decorative adjectives. These are Tolkien being cosmologically precise in the way that only someone who has built a complete alternative mythology can be precise, where every name is a statement about the nature of the thing it names. Oldest, not old, not ancient, not elder. The superlative form, the end of the scale. Treebeard, in The Two Towers, calls himself the oldest living thing that still walks beneath the sun. He has been walking since before the elves awoke in Cuiviénen, before Morgoth was first defeated, before the trees of Valinor were lit. And Treebeard calls Tom Bombadil his senior, without hesitation, without qualification, without any suggestion that this ranking is uncertain. Oldest, full stop. And then, fatherless. In Tolkien's cosmology, this word is not a biographical detail. It is a cosmological statement of the most extreme possible kind. The Ainulindal, the creation story at the beginning of the Silmarillion, describes how Ilúvatar made the Ainur before the world existed, how the Ainur sang the music that contained the pattern of everything that would ever exist in Arda, how every being that walks in Middle-earth, elf or man, Vala or Maya, Ent or eagle, was first conceived as a theme in the music, before the world was formed. Every creature in Tolkien's world has a father in the cosmic sense, a source, a point of origin in the creative act. Every creature has a point of origin within the music, except the being whose elvish name means fatherless. The Index to the Silmarillion, where Tolkien systematically names and classifies every significant being in his cosmology, has one entry unlike any other. Tom Bombadil appears, under his elvish name, with a notation that he cannot be classified. Not that he is unknown. Not that his nature is mysterious in a casual sense. Cannot be classified. Which is a statement about the failure of every category Tolkien built to contain him. Tolkien built extraordinarily specific categories: Valar, Maiar, High Elves, Grey Elves, Men, Hobbits, Dwarves, Ents, Eagles. He knew where everything fit. He spent decades mapping the relationships and hierarchies and origins, and he left one entry in the Index with no category. Now take that alongside Letter 144. In Letter 144, Tolkien writes to Naomi Mitchison directly about Tom Bombadil. He calls Tom the spirit of the vanishing Oxford and Berkshire countryside. He calls him the eldest of things, and he says Tom represents a particular embodying of pure enjoyment of things for what they are, not for their value to others. Pure enjoyment of things for what they are, not for what they could become, not for what power they could give, not for what they could be made into, for what they are. Picture this: a world before Sauron, a world before the first Dark Lord, before Morgoth discovered his own desire for dominion, before any will in the universe had yet turned toward the music of itself, rather than the music of everything. Something walks through that world singing, and it delights in trees for being trees, in water for being water, in stone for being stone. It does not look at anything and think, what could I make this into? It does not look at anything and think, what could this do for me? It walks, it sings. The world is sufficient as it is. The world has always been sufficient as it is. This is Tom Bombadil, and this is not a comfortable idea. The more precisely you understand it, the less comfortable it becomes, because it means that Tom Bombadil exists prior to the very problem that the Lord of the Rings is about. The War of the Ring, the struggle against Sauron, the enormous effort of good beings trying to hold back a darkness that feeds on desire. Tom Bombadil is not a participant in that struggle. He is evidence that the struggle exists within a context that is older and larger and entirely indifferent to its outcome. Now we need to go to what the ring is actually made of, not what it does to other people, what it is at the level of its construction. In Letter 211, Tolkien writes with unusual directness about the mechanics of the ring's creation. Sauron poured into the ring his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. This is not metaphor. This is not a convenient summary. This is the literal cosmological mechanism. A portion of Sauron's own being was transferred into the object. The ring is not a tool that Sauron uses. It is, in a real sense, a physical portion of Sauron himself. His desire crystallized into gold, his will given portable and transferable form. Sauron's will is the will to dominate. To understand why that will cannot find purchase in Tom Bombadil, you have to trace Sauron's nature back through the Ainulindale to its source. Tolkien tells us in the Valaquenta of the Silmarillion that Sauron was originally a Maya in the service of Aule, the smith Vala, the craftsman, the maker. He was, in his beginning, enormously gifted, ordered, precise, skilled in the management of complex systems. But what attracted him early to Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, was that Morgoth seemed to offer him the swiftest route to large-scale manufacture and the organization of things. Sauron wanted order. He wanted to arrange the world according to a will. That desire, efficient and cold, and not yet explicitly evil in its earliest form, was already the seed of the ring. Because the ring does not offer everyone the same thing. It is a custom instrument. It reaches into the specific shape of each mind's desire and inflates it until the desire consumes the mind. Gandalf, if he took the ring, would become a tyrant through the amplification of his genuine goodness. His desire to help would become a desire to impose help, and imposing help would become imposing order, and imposing order would become becoming Sauron. Galadriel says this plainly about herself. She would become through love of the world, not Sauron's servant, but something terrible in a different register, a queen over all, everyone bending to her benevolent and irresistible will. The ring finds desire. It inflates it until desire and the self are the same thing. Tom Bombadil's desire is to walk through his forest and sing about what he finds there. And what that means, if you follow it with the precision Tolkien expects, is that the ring reaches into Tom Bombadil and finds something for which it has no enlargement available. Not suppressed desire, not controlled desire. A mode of existing in which the particular gap between what he is and what he wants to be simply does not open. He is already what he needs to be. The morning is already enough. The river is already enough. Goldberry is already enough. The stones and the songs and the waterflowers are already enough. The ring is a machine built to exploit insufficiency. Tom Bombadil is the one being in Middle-earth for whom the world is sufficient. And now we can name the thing. In the philosophical tradition Tolkien knew deeply, the tradition that runs from Boethius through Aquinas to the scholastic thinkers he read and loved and disagreed with productively for most of his adult life, there is a concept of being without lack, of a mode of existence in which there is no gap between what a thing is and what it wants to be. In that tradition, this mode of existence has historically been associated with God, the uncaused cause, the being that exists from itself without any prior source, whose existence is simply given and complete and not in need of anything it does not already have. Tolkien would not put God directly into his mythology. He was always careful about that boundary. Ilúvatar sits at the top of his cosmological hierarchy as the creator, transcendent, moving the world from outside. He does not walk in it. But something in a yellow coat walks through the old forest, and it cannot be classified, and its name means oldest and fatherless. Here is what nobody asks when they put those facts together. If everything in Arda came from the music of the Ainur, and if Tom Bombadil is fatherless, meaning he has no origin in the music, then what is he? There are two possibilities that follow from Tolkien's own cosmological rules. Either Tom Bombadil predates the music, existing before the creative act that shaped the pattern of all things in the world, which would make him something prior even to the formal categories of creation. Or Tom Bombadil is Tolkien's attempt to embody in narrative form a mode of being that the music points toward but cannot fully express. The mode of existence in which nothing is lacking, in which the world is found complete and sufficient as it is, and in which the corrupting mechanism of desire therefore has no mechanism to turn. Either way, the ring cannot reach him, because either he exists outside the jurisdiction the ring operates in, or he embodies the one thing the ring has never encountered and cannot model, a will that wants nothing except what is already there. Now the betrayal frame, because here is what every person who watched Peter Jackson's films took away from Tom Bombadil's absence. He was cut because he wasn't important to the plot. He was whimsical and inconvenient, and his chapters didn't advance the story. He was the section editors have always wished Tolkien had cut from the book, and Jackson was finally wise enough to do what the book couldn't. This is the complete and total reversal of what Tolkien intended. In Letter 153, written to Peter Hastings, Tolkien addresses Tom Bombadil directly, in a way that should stop any reader who encounters it cold. He says, "I do not mean in the framework of the tale to explain Tom Bombadil. He represents something that I feel important, though I would not be able to express it in other terms of the mythology." Read that again. He represents something that I feel important, not something decorative, not something atmospheric. Something important, and the reason Tolkien cannot express it in other terms of his mythology is specific and precise. Whatever Tom Bombadil represents cannot be translated into the language of Ainur and Valar and Rings of Power and the long drama of desire and corruption that occupies the rest of the legendarium. Tom Bombadil points towards something that the mythology itself does not fully contain. This is a creator saying that his own creation has an edge, and that Tom Bombadil is standing at that edge, pointing towards something beyond it. The Tom Bombadil chapters are not a whimsical detour. They are the single moment in The Lord of the Rings where the narrative steps back from the War of the Ring and shows you what the war is happening inside of. The hobbits arrive in the old forest, exhausted and afraid. They leave rested and equipped and somehow changed in a way that Tolkien doesn't over-explain. They have encountered something that the Ring, that Sauron, that all the enormous apparatus of power and darkness in the story has never encountered and cannot account for. And they move on, into the war, into the loss. And Tom Bombadil goes back inside and has supper. Here is the dark part. Tolkien says, in the same letter, that if Sauron won, Tom Bombadil would fall last. Not first, not in the heat of battle, last, after everything else has been conquered. And this is how he describes what that would look like. The shadow of the enemy would cover all the earth. But Tom would be free, obviously. Not obviously alive, not obviously safe. Free, in the specific sense that the one thing Sauron's domination cannot apply itself to is the thing that does not participate in the economy of desire and domination at all. Tom Bombadil would be the last free thing in Middle-earth. Not because he fought for his freedom, because freedom, in his case, is not a condition that can be removed. It is not a defense he maintains. It is the thing he is. Think about what that would mean to Sauron. For a being whose entire project, whose entire identity, whose entire cosmological purpose has become the domination of all things, to find one thing in all the world that cannot even perceive you as relevant, that does not experience your victory as victory over it, because it does not participate in any category that makes conquest meaningful, this would not be infuriating. It would not be baffling. Those are still reactions within the framework of desire and conflict. It would be incomprehensible. Tom Bombadil would not be a symbol of defiance against Sauron's order. He would not be a rebel, or a holdout, or a resistance. He would simply continue to exist in the way he exists, which is the one way that Sauron's architecture of dominion has no room for. And there is something in that truth that is darker than a battle. Now we need to talk about Goldberry, because almost no one does in this context, and she matters for what she reveals about Tom's nature. When Frodo asks who Goldberry is, the answer in the text is, she is the river daughter. When he asks who Tom Bombadil is, the answer is, he is. These are not evasions. They are the most accurate available descriptions of beings whose natures cannot be explained in relational terms, because they are not related to anything prior to themselves. They simply are. Their existence does not refer to anything outside itself. In The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, the poem collection Tolkien published separately, a story in verse describes Tom catching Goldberry in the river and making her his wife. Tolkien in his letters describes her as a nature spirit, the spirit of the river, the embodiment of the seasonal rhythm of water in a specific place. She is younger than Tom, more specifically local, more tied to the particular feature of the natural world she represents. But she shares his quality of existing for its own sake. She does not reach. She does not desire her own improvement. She is the river, and she is contented to be the river, and the river is already everything a river needs to be. Their home is the warmest place in the entire trilogy. Not warm the way Rivendell is warm, beautifully and deliberately, the warmth of a preserved thing. Warm the way a place is warm when nothing in it is being held back, when nothing is being saved for later or protected against eventual loss. Warm with the uncomplicated ease of beings who have nowhere else they want to be. And this is where the darkness comes in through a side entrance. Tolkien's deepest emotional register is loss. He said this directly. He called the legendarium his attempt to grapple with what he described as the ache in human experience, the sense that beauty is always being taken away, even as you look at it, that joy has mortality built into it, that the world is always becoming less than it was. The Silmarillion is relentless tragedy. The Lord of the Rings ends with the elves departing and the magic diminishing, and the Third Age dissolving into the ordinary world. Even at its most triumphant, this story tastes of sorrow, and Tom and Goldberry are just happy. Not bravely happy, not resignedly happy. Not happy in the way that heroes are sometimes happy, for a moment before the next sacrifice. Just genuinely, uncomplicatedly, permanently happy. Undiminished, unmarked by loss. The one pocket in the entire legendarium where the ache is absent. Is that comforting? Or is it the most unsettling thing in the story? Because here is what it might mean. A being that cannot feel loss is also a being that cannot fully participate in what makes the world valuable in the way Tolkien understood it. The way things are precious because they are passing. The way the elves' love of the world is so achingly deep precisely because they can see it ending. Tom Bombadil cannot feel that ache. He does not carry it. He is something other than what the world of loss produces. He is prior to the ache. And that places him, if you follow it far enough, in a category that is not quite the same as the category of things we call alive. He walks in the forest. He sings. He rescues hobbits. He is warm and kind and genuinely helpful. But he exists in a mode of being that the world of loss cannot touch. And that means the world of loss is not fully his world. The old forest is shrinking. Tolkien mentions this. The woodland that once covered the entire region where the Shire now sits has been reduced over the centuries. The trees have been cut, the land has been organized and farmed and settled, and what remains is a fragment of what it was. Tom Bombadil remains in that fragment. He does not expand his territory. He does not try to reclaim what has been lost. He remains in the part that remains, and he is as content in the diminished forest as he presumably was in the vast one. There is something in that contentment, if you look at it long enough, that does not resolve into comfort. It looks like the peace of someone who accommodated the grief of watching the world diminish so long ago that the grief has passed beyond feeling into something that is simply the shape of his existence. Now let's name what Tolkien felt important and could not express in other terms. Because in letter 153, after saying he cannot express in other terms of his mythology what Tom Bombadil represents, Tolkien goes on. He does not say Tom is unimportant. He says he represents something important. And the distinction he draws is precise. Tom is not an important person in the context of the story's events, but he embodies a principle that Tolkien believed mattered even more than the events. Tolkien was reading and writing in the tradition of medieval Catholic philosophy. He was influenced by Boethius and Aquinas, by the Augustinian concept of the soul's restlessness and the thing that restlessness reaches toward, by the ontological tradition that distinguishes between beings that exist contingently, deriving their being from causes outside themselves, and the one being that exists necessarily, that is its own cause, whose existence is simply given rather than derived. The contingent beings of Tolkien's world, every creature made from the music, reaching and desiring and suffering the gap between what they are and what they want, are the normal condition of created existence. They are valuable and real, and their stories matter enormously. Tom Bombadil embodies the other thing, the non-contingent thing, the thing that does not have a gap to suffer, that exists in a state that the tradition would call sufficiency, and that the ring cannot corrupt because the ring has nothing to work with. This is what Tolkien felt was important. The principle that under all the reaching and the corruption and the enormous drama of desire's consequences, there is something in the world that simply is. That was before the darkness and will be after it. That cannot be reached by the logic of domination, because it does not participate in the logic that makes domination possible. Picture this, the War of the Ring at its darkest moment. Frodo is on the slopes of Mount Doom, and the eye of Sauron is everywhere, and the darkness is total, and everyone who remains in Middle-earth is carrying the weight of what it would mean to lose. Every face in the story is under that weight. Rivendell under that weight, Lothlorien under that weight, the Shire, unknowing, under that weight. And in the old forest, which is a little smaller than it used to be, a stout figure in a yellow coat is following the course of the river and singing about the light on the water. Not oblivious, not ignorant. Simply not within the frame that the weight applies to. The ring's failure and the ring's success are two outcomes of the same drama. And the drama is entirely built from desire. Sauron's desire for everything, Frodo's desire to end his burden, Sam's desire to be faithful, Aragorn's desire to be worthy. The drama needs desire to exist, and Tom Bombadil, who desires nothing beyond the morning in front of him, is not in the drama. He is in the morning, and here is the implication nobody follows to its end. If Tom Bombadil is outside the frame of the drama, then the Fellowship's journey, the destruction of the ring, the long defeat and long victory that makes up the last third of the book, all of it is happening inside a frame that Tom Bombadil is not in. Not because he is above it. He is not looking down at it with detachment or godlike indifference. He is genuinely glad when the hobbits appear at his door. He feeds them and sings to them and sends them out better equipped to face what comes. He is not uncaring, but he is not invested in the outcome, not in the way every other being in the story is invested. He is not afraid of what happens if Sauron wins. He does not carry the specific dread that hangs over every free person in Middle-earth who understands what victory for the enemy would mean. He is the one being in the story who can say, in full and genuine sincerity, that the outcome will not change what he is. Because the outcome, whatever it is, happens at a level of reality that Tom Bombadil does not fully inhabit. Every character of significance in this story is defined by what they fear. Frodo fears the ring and what it is making him become. Sam fears losing Frodo and failing the task. Gandalf fears the darkness coming before the ring can be destroyed. Aragorn fears inheriting a kingship he is not certain he has earned. Boromir fears the fall of his city. Galadriel fears herself. Elrond fears the passing of the Third Age and everything beautiful in it. Tom Bombadil is not afraid. This is not suppressed fear. This is not managed fear. This is the complete structural absence of the condition of fearfulness, because fearfulness requires a gap between what you have and what you might lose, and Tom Bombadil does not experience that gap. Now think about what perfect fearlessness actually costs. There is a version of this realization that is comforting. The ancient being who exists outside the conflict, the reminder that beyond the war and the loss, there is still something that cannot be touched, that sings in the morning regardless of what the darkness does. Tolkien seems to intend this reading, at least partially. The Tom Bombadil chapters function as a reprieve. The hobbits arrive exhausted and leave restored. But there is another reading. Tom Bombadil's fearlessness is inseparable from his inability to be changed by whatever happens. He cannot fear the outcome because he cannot be changed by the outcome. He cannot be changed because his existence is already complete in the way that only prior and self-sufficient being can be complete. And completeness of that kind, in a world full of incomplete and striving and suffering beings, does not translate across the gap. Tom cannot save Middle-earth. He will not try. Not because he is weak, not even because his power is limited to his own territory, but because the very quality that makes him immune to the ring also makes him unable to participate in what the ring's destruction requires: sacrifice, risk, the willingness to lose something you care about in service of something larger. Tom cannot lose what he cares about. What he cares about is the world itself, and the world is always there. He is the most free being in Middle-earth precisely because he is the only one who needs nothing from it. And that freedom is, in the end, a kind of exile. Not a painful exile, not a self-aware exile, but an exile nonetheless, from the community of beings who love things so much they are willing to risk them, who value things so much the thought of losing them is the shape of their fear, who participate in the great drama of Middle-earth because the drama is, in the end, about whether the things they love can be preserved. Tom Bombadil loves the world without needing to preserve it, because he has never lost anything, and I'm not sure whether that is the most beautiful or the most heartbreaking thing about him. Picture this: long after the Third Age, after the elves have gone to the Undying Lands, after Aragorn's line has reached its end, after the Shire has become something unrecognizable, and the names that the Fellowship bore have passed into legend, and then into mythology, and then into the kind of deep forgetting that even legend eventually finds. Middle-earth is becoming the world we know. Ordinary, unmagical, organized by a kind of human will that has no room in it for the old, slow, deep things that once walked in the forest and sang over the stones. And in what remains of the old forest, smaller now than it has ever been, the rivers running between banks that have been fenced and owned and mapped by people who do not know what they are fencing, something still walks between the trees, still singing, not remembering the fellowship, not mourning the departure of the elves, not carrying any weight of what has been lost, because what it is has not been diminished by any of the losses. It was here before the trees of Valinor were lit. It will be here, in whatever form the world takes after this form, in the way that things at the oldest level of being are not ends but continuities. Is that comforting? The loneliest thing I have ever imagined is not a being that grieves forever. It is a being that cannot grieve at all. What Tolkien embedded in Tom Bombadil is a question about the nature of power that the Ring narrative circles without quite landing on. The Ring's power is the power of accumulation. Every character who falls to the Ring falls to the impulse to reach beyond what they have, toward more knowledge, more control, more ability to make the world conform to the shape of the will. And Tolkien is precise about the fact that this impulse is not always selfish in origin. Boromir wants the Ring to save Gondor. Saruman wants it to organize the world efficiently and end its chaos. Galadriel, in the version of herself the Ring offers, would use it to make Middle-earth beautiful and full of her own golden light. All of them are reaching for something genuinely good, and the Ring simply inflates the reaching until the reaching destroys what it meant to save. Tom Bombadil does not reach. He does not build or accumulate or preserve in the anxious way the elves preserve, keeping beauty behind rings of power and carefully sustained memory, buying time against an inevitable diminishment. He lets the world pass through him and passes through the world, and neither of them is less for the encounter. In Tolkien's Catholic imagination, this reads as something theologically precise. It reads as sanctity, not the dramatic sanctity of the martyr who endures everything, but the quiet sanctity of a being that has no need of anything it does not already have, and is therefore outside the reach of the grasping that constitutes the root of all evil in this world. Tolkien once wrote that the root of all evil in his mythology is the same as in the Christian tradition, the desire to possess, to control, to make the world an expression of one's own will. Morgoth fell to this. Sauron fell to this. Saruman fell to this. Every diminished character in the story fell to some expression of this desire. Tom Bombadil never fell, because Tom Bombadil has no pride in that specific sense. He is entirely, genuinely pleased with being exactly what he is, where he is, when he is. He has no ambition. He has no agenda. He has no project of self-improvement or world improvement running in the background of his contentment. And perhaps that is what Tolkien felt important and could not express in other terms. Perhaps Tom Bombadil is not a mystery about the world. Perhaps he is a reminder about what the world is underneath all the drama of desire and loss, underneath the war of the Ring and the grief of the elves and the sacrifice of the fellowship. A reminder that at its oldest and most foundational level, the world is sufficient, that it was before the darkness came, that it will be after the darkness passes. Not because anyone fought to keep it sufficient, but because sufficiency is what it is at the level that predates all the fighting. The Fellowship fights for the world, and they are right to fight. And their fight is real and costly and beautiful and worth every word Tolkien gave it. But Tom Bombadil was already there, will still be there, does not need the fight to resolve in any particular way. And the dark secret, the thing the movies cut because it didn't fit the story's plot, is that Tolkien put him there on purpose. Put him there to show you what the world looks like from a perspective older than the conflict. What being looks like when it is prior to desire. What exists in Middle-earth that Sauron's entire architecture of domination has no room for and never will. Did Tolkien place Tom Bombadil in the story as a mystery to be solved? We have traveled a long way now, through the Ainulindale and the Council of Elrond and the house on the Withywindle and the letters of a man who built a world precise enough that its single unclassifiable entry tells you more than 100 pages of exposition. We have seen what the ring does and why it cannot do it to Tom. We have followed the implication out to its furthest and strangest destination, and the question is still there, not unanswerable in the lazy sense, the way a mystery novel withholds a clue, unanswerable in the precise sense that the answer lives just beyond the edge of the language available for it. Tom Bombadil is either something prior to the music of the Ainur, existing outside the cosmological framework that makes Sauron's power possible, in which case the ring cannot reach him because he exists outside the ring's jurisdiction entirely. Or Tom Bombadil is Tolkien's attempt to embody in narrative form the philosophical principle of being without lack, a mode of existence in which there is nothing for the ring to amplify, because there is no gap between what Tom is and what Tom wants to be. Or he is both of these things at once, because in Tolkien's world the metaphysical and the narrative always point at the same truth from different angles. Any of these answers is, in some sense, the same answer. The dark secret behind Tom Bombadil is not that he is secretly powerful, not that he is a Vala in disguise, not that he is holding some cosmic force in reserve for the final act. The secret is simpler than any of that, and stranger, and harder to sit with once you have understood it. He is not a mystery about power. He is a mystery about enough. In the economy of Tolkien's world, everything has a cost. The great victories come wrapped in loss. Frodo destroys the ring and loses himself doing it. Aragorn becomes king, and Arwen gives up her immortality. The elves depart. The world diminishes. Even the best possible outcome is an ending of something. Tom Bombadil walks home to Goldberry and has supper. There is something in that image that should stop you. Not because his contentment is monstrous. It is not. It is genuine and warm, and he extends it freely to everyone who reaches his door. But because it reveals, by contrast, how much of everything else in this story, this legendarium, this enormous and beautiful world, is defined by its reaching, by the gap between what things are and what they want to be. Every character we love is reaching. Sam toward home, Frodo toward relief from the weight he carries, Aragorn toward the worthiness he is not certain he has, Gandalf toward the conclusion of a task he has carried across an entire age of the world. Even Galadriel, ancient and radiant and everything the Third Age kept safe, is reaching toward the sea, through her ring and her patience and the long discipline of someone who has been waiting for departure for longer than most beings have existed. Tom Bombadil has already arrived. He arrived before the journey began. He has been arrived since before the world was made. Did Tolkien put him there as warning, as comfort, as both at once, dressed in a yellow coat and a battered hat, too absurd to be taken seriously until you follow the implications all the way down and discover they end somewhere you were not expecting? The ring is destroyed. Sauron is unmade. The Third Age closes and the world turns toward its ordinary form, and the magic diminishes, and the things that were once extraordinary become the kind of things that only very careful readers notice traces of in the landscape of a country that used to be something else. And in the old forest, in what is left of it, something sings. Not for anyone, not toward any purpose, not because the world needs to be saved or remembered or held back from its next diminishment. Just because the world is there, and that, when everything else has been said and argued and celebrated and mourned, might be the thing that endures most deeply after all the great stories have found their endings. I want to know what you make of it, not what you think Tom Bombadil is in terms of cosmological category. Whether you think what he is matters, whether existence without lack is a comfort to you, or whether it is, in some way you might not expect, the loneliest thing in the story. Whether Tolkien intended us to find him reassuring, or whether the reassurance has an edge in it that cuts if you press on it long enough. Drop your answer below. This is the kind of question that does not resolve in the comments. It deepens there. And if you want to keep going further into what Tolkien's world actually says when you follow it to the bottom, subscribe. There is a great deal more in the Legendarium that no one is talking about yet.